Nice. Well, thank you very much for joining today, Eric. Um, yeah, how's it going so far today?
So far, so good. Kind of right in the middle of some big projects at work, so it's always a good day to be building software. So
Yeah, nice. Hopefully not too much right in the middle.
yeah, kind of right in the middle.
Okay,
I,
all
I was
right,
hoping
all
to have
right.
it all finished yesterday, but you know how it is.
Gotcha. Okay, well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk a little bit, about some HTMX stuff and sort of your experience. So I just wanted to kind of get some background, give some background. I first, saw you and talking about your sort of HTMX experience back in January, and you put out a tweet that was basically like, I just spent the weekend rewriting my whole app with using HTMX, and basically like here's why it was awesome. That's sort of my understanding of that tweet. And then recently you said, but I stand by everything I said. So does that sound about right?
Yeah, it's still awesome. It's
Yeah.
as awesome as it was that first day.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess just some background. You've been building web apps for a while, and sort of what's your preferred language and what's your kind of like background with building
Yeah.
stuff?
So I've been doing this professionally now for a little over 25 years. For the last like 10 years or so, I've been kind of on the entrepreneur side of things, most often serving as like a CTO, first engineer on the team, building the product, getting the MVP in the market, and then eventually hiring and hopefully scaling. So yeah, I've been building web apps in some form or another since the early 2000s. Um,
Yep.
as far as like preferred tech stack and whatnot. On the website, generally I don't care that much. I like web as a platform, so I'm comfortable in PHP. I'm comfortable in backend JavaScript, whether that's Node or most recently I've switched to Bun. I've done Django work before. I've done SharePoint development before. Like so, as long as it's web, I'm happy.
Yep. Yep. And so are you sort of your own company, or do you sort of work for a bunch of different companies, or how's your sort of setup
Yeah,
these
so
days?
my current company is a startup we formed last year called MakeStartups. And so we were a nonprofit that had existed for about a decade before I joined the team. And that company, that nonprofit, teaches entrepreneurs how to like launch, design, and scale their business. And I joined the
Nice.
team just specifically to like help them build a learning management system, help them track student record data over multiple years that were required to track that by the government. Um, it was right at the same time that the AI revolution had kind of kicked off with ChatGPT, and it was really exciting. And so we were at an intersection where for the first time we could build a learning management system that was useful on an individual level, where we could use the technology to make like specific recommendations to each business on a case by case basis, where before that was what we were doing in person, right? Like our mentorship program was like, I'm going to know about your company and I'm going to tell you, the things that I think you should improve. And with AI, we could really build a platform that would scale across the world. So we started building we spun out as a for-profit company, also called Make
Yep.
Startups, and we built a product called Co-founder OS, which we kind of are positioning as like the operating system for startup, where it's going to have a whole bunch of apps and tools in there. It's going to teach you some things, and we're using AI and little bits and bobs to provide value wherever possible.
Very cool. Interesting. Um, and so just as a side note, I noticed that your Twitter handle is at Blister. Is it Blister or B Lister?
It's Blister, so
Blister.
that's
It's a
yeah,
great
that's a
Twitter
whole.
handle, first of
Thank you.
all.
Well, I got swatted once because some guy wanted me to give it to him, and I wasn't willing to part with it.
Yeah.
Um, that's like a holdover from back in like the late '90s. I was very heavily involved in IRC, and we had, some of the servers I was in had a nick length thing. So I was like trying to think of an edgy hacker name that was under nine
Nice.
characters.
Yeah. No, it's a good call. I just wanted to throw that
Oh,
out there. I
thank you.
like that. Okay, so you don't really care so much about, you're not sort of married to a particular language, and as long as it's kind of web based, because it sounds like most of the stuff you do, you want it to be worldwide, you want it to be accessible to anybody with a browser, like co-founder OS, you know, basically helping other people create web startups. Does that sound right?
Yeah, we don't even care about web startups. Most of our startups going through our program, they're trying to build like restaurants or a bagel store.
Okay.
We're trying to help the 5 million or so businesses that start every year that don't get venture capital money, or that don't it's just people that have a good idea for what they want to do. They want to be their own boss, and we believe very strongly that like entrepreneurship's not that hard. You just need to like know the steps that you need to take and in what order. So
very cool. So one thing I think is interesting about like, you started as a nonprofit, or the company started as a nonprofit. And it's obviously like nonprofits are great. And I love the sort of, it takes a lot of thought and effort and time and stuff to keep a nonprofit going, to sort of go in that direction. But I do think there is this benefit that you get from when you sort of start moving into a for-profit. And I think, some people don't like that. Some people do. But I do think there's some benefits there where your focus sort of, things get really kind of like, you're forced to make a lot of different kind of trade-offs. And sometimes those are really good, and you can sort of expand a little bit. So I don't know, what was your sort of feeling on that?
Yeah.
Was it better being a nonprofit or a for-profit? You don't have to answer that if it's sensitive.
Yeah, no, we're still both, and so
They're both. Okay.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that attracted me as a technologist to the business, is that like we are eating our own dog food every single day. Like the software that I'm writing and that my team is working on is making our nonprofit more effective. We're able to help more people, help more startups be successful, and now we're trying to scale that the software nationwide to all the other organizations that are like us. And so
Gotcha.
There's a very clear delineation. Like we just sell a software tool that makes it easy to teach, and then the nonprofit still has a mission of like helping startups in Augusta, Georgia. So
nice. Yeah, because I feel like I see this kind of split in the open source world too, where like there's all these open source packages, which I count HTMX as one of them. This is not like a big money making package for anybody, but if it gets to the point where somebody can make money from building stuff with it, and then it actually does help the whole ecosystem to have this kind of the ability to get more people in there, and to, if people are spending more time building tools for it. So I think it's a nice mix when you get this sort of that mentality of like a nonprofit side plus sort of this more business oriented for-profit stuff. So
and being a for-profit just made it really simple from like an accounting standpoint. We need to be able to attract good engineers and offer them equity. We need to be able to raise some funds from VC, just to kind of get us a little bit of runway.
Yeah. So you sort of having some experience just building for the web in general and building stuff without really caring. I feel like that's kind of a natural fit already for HTMX. Like hypermedia on whatever stack or whatever. Howl, what is it? Hypermedia on whatever language.
I haven't heard of that one. I like that. That's mine.
Yeah,
now.
It's there. I might be saying it wrong. But yeah, it's one of those. It's definitely Howl. But yeah, it's just this idea that like it doesn't. I come from a Laravel background. I've talked to people who come from Django and Go and like all these different Python stuff, like all these different sort of languages, and it really doesn't matter. It's like because they've the HTMX project has sort of abstracted the back end and some of this web stuff to this. So it seems like that's sort of a natural fit. But what were you sort of doing before HTMX? What was the sort of tech stack then?
I mean, so I often get a lot of flack for this, but my philosophy has always been like, for a product, you should be focused on like, what does your product actually do? So what are the features and business problems that you're solving for your users? And so, as a CTO of an early stage startup, my job is to just launch. And so anything that can get me to launch as quickly as possible is the best. So like for this product, I started with PHP, HTML, vanilla JavaScript whenever I needed it, and CSS. Like I don't need to complicate my tech stack to build something that gets users. And so, I know everybody's like super big into React and things now, and React is great for what you need it to be for. But like as a solo developer in a brand new company, I don't want to spend weeks and months setting up an environment when I could just literally be writing code and launching.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm on board with that. It's the PHP was kind of my first introduction, and I resisted even frameworks for a long time. I use Laravel now and have for a while, but But it took me a while to get to that where I was like, okay, I can trust a framework enough, to like, I'm not going to come across any like thing that they don't handle and then I'll be screwed and stuff like that. But it's hard to beat just a straight,
Yeah.
you just put this on the server and now your website is up and running.
Yeah. When git pull is your build step, it's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
But I think like a lot of these feelings of mine, opinions, have been influenced by, I've been doing this since the early 2000s. I've been through the jQuery era. We played with prototype.js when that was hot. We used EXT and MooTools and stuff. Like, I've seen all of this, and every single time everyone's like, if you don't use this framework, you're wasting your time. And then what ends up happening is it's not the framework that everyone uses anymore in 2 years. You end up rewriting it, or there's some poor sucker who's getting paid to maintain, a jQuery 1.1 application that is 300,000 lines of code, and they can't do anything about it. So I'm always like, the less things I have to tie myself to, the better. And if we ever get to a stage where I'm like, oh, okay, we need React Native for, we want to launch a mobile app or something. Well, that's a technical decision where we have to have that because of that use case. And I think people reach for things too quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you have a chance to listen to the last conversation I had was with Alex. I'm blanking on his last name right now, but Alex Petros. But, his concept was the 100-year web service. And it's like trying to build something that can just sit on the web without being touched. And even if you have to update it, you can. And it's like, and I think a lot of the industry has kind of lost that as a mindset. But, I think personally that people who keep that mindset are going to be in a good place. Yeah. That's kind of what it sounds like you're sort of heading towards.
And I've just been burned by it so many times where it's like, I have built so many version 1s of products to only have to like, okay, now that's great, let's rewrite the whole thing. And so I'm like, why do we pick things that are painful? I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, you're preaching to the choir here. I think we're probably in similar development world. I kind of came out of college in 2005, 2004, 2005 era and started building stuff, but it's like I have these applications and these things that I still support for people. And the ones that I wrote in like Vue.js, I was like, the Vue was taking over the Laravel world. I was like, all right, I got to get into front end. Like Vue it's mostly attributes. I can do this. And the ones that I wrote in that, like, I just regret it so much. Like I've just been burned and burned. I'm just like, okay, like.
Meanwhile, HTML and CSS is awesome now. Browsers actually work. Like, you don't need things. It's so relieving, but everybody's complicating things so much so that you have to have like an engineering team just to make your widgets. And I'm like, okay, if you say so.
Yeah. No, and that's one of the things I'll stop talking about my last conversation with Alex, but he was just saying like browsers in the last 10 years quietly got way better. Yeah. And so people don't even know it because they don't have advertising campaigns about how good the browser is now. Like, why would they? But if you actually look into it, they're way better. And like you can do things and things are smooth and fast and all these kind of stuff.
And I had kind of the same experience with PHP, where it's like I started in PHP in 2003 and I've used it, but then I switched to JavaScript and I did some Go and stuff. Like I've done everything. But PHP 7 made PHP freaking awesome again. And it's like ridiculously fast. I have my entire server running on like a $20 a month VPS and it's, rendering pages in 0.002 seconds, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, this was one of the shocking things that, like, I always used to like how, so I've been an Apple user for a while, but you start to notice that, like, with each new Apple update, things are getting bigger and slower. And that used to happen with Windows. And I used to always kind of, like, rag on Windows about it. And then, like, meanwhile, in the PHP world, like, PHP 5 goes to PHP 7. And I'm like, all right, am I going to update? And one of the things they mention is like, it's going to be twice as fast. I was like, okay, this is different.
And it was.
Like, it was actually twice as fast. And I have these, I did all these tests because I was like, all right, we'll see, And so I set up these things and just a for loop with like a million, stuff like that. Really simple kind of like basic tests, create objects, crush objects. And I upgraded the servers and did the stuff and whatever. And I ran all my tests and like it was literally twice as fast. And every person that I upgraded for noticed it. Like, and this is a big deal to me to like actually focus on that kind of thing. So yeah, no, I really appreciated they didn't just bloat their system. Yeah. They went through and were like, let's make it smaller and faster. And I was like, that's awesome.
Yep. And 8 just kept getting better. So like now it's if I'm starting a new company, PHP is a very dependable version 1 selection where it's like I can just write code, output HTML, CSS, let caching do what caching does. Like I don't have to worry about most of that stuff. And when we do get to the point where we've got millions of users and have to scale, okay, well then the engineering team can maybe break things up into microservices or whatever we need to do. But like,
Yeah.
don't pick it on day one.
Yeah. I've always found the bottleneck is the database. You know,
Yeah.
it's like if you've got millions of users and things start to slow down, like do a couple more indexes, split some database
Maybe
tables
shard
out.
some things. Yeah.
Yeah. Like just do a little bit of SQL work, SQLite, whatever
agree.
you're doing. Yeah.
So anyway, that's a roundabout way to say that is why I loved HTMX from day one, because I've already been operating like this for the past 20 years. And HTMX being like, haha, you can just add an attribute, and like now you're making GET requests that replace content on your page, and you're sending less HTML to the client. I was like, oh, that's great. I love this. And
yeah, so you know, I don't know if this was like just kind of the start of the rewrite, but in your tweet you started like, I spent the weekend rewriting our entire product. So is that like, how much of your entire product was rewritten in that weekend?
Mostly. So I started with where exactly you would expect I would start. We have a sidebar with a whole bunch of different pages that are linked in there. I just changed those to all say, hey, whenever somebody clicks this link, hx get and fill in the center content div with the file that already existed. Because, you know, our entire product is like file-based routing. And so when you make a request, whatever the first thing is after the URL is like, you know, CRM, for example, that's going to load the CRM file and it's going to put it in the center content. And then we got all this Chrome around the page where it's like the header bar and a search bar. And so everything was already structured in a way that made it really easy for me to test it out. And so by adding all of the things in the sidebar to say hx get, fill in this center content div here with whatever comes back from the server, that was like 98% of what needed to be done.
Right.
But then there were like 7 or 8 different parts of the product that took a little bit longer, like almost 8 hours of.
Almost
you know,
8 hours.
We would use like third-party
Not that
libraries
long.
for things like, oh, I want to have drag and drop file uploads, or I want to have, you know, we have a map in our product, or we have like some charting and stuff. And a lot of those JavaScript libraries are great. I love them for the same reason I love HTMX. It's like I don't need to like build my product around it. I just drop in a script tag, and you know I pass it a JSON object or whatever the format of the data they want, and it makes a pretty chart. But most of those libraries expect me to be like, okay, the page loads, it loads this script, and then, you know, like on the onReady or a DOM content loaded, it like, you know, initializes whatever that canvas element is with the data. And the problem is, as soon as I switch over to HTMX, like it's great the first time, but then if you press the back button or something, HTMX is like, great, I'm just pop stating back and nothing actually has called or loaded. So I had to like figure out all the different events that were firing behind the scenes. So there's like HTMX after settle that I tap into. There's also like I had to do something in pop state, which is window pop state, where when you press the back button and you don't want to actually leave the page, it's firing an event so that I can keep it. So it gives it like a single page application feel, even though it's not really that. So I just had to change a few of those things. And I ended up making some extra JavaScript code for myself that made it easier for me to like debug and track our personal application state as we were building the product. So it's stuff like, okay, well, if I've loaded this JavaScript function already and then I go back to the page later, I don't need to reload it. So it's like internal caching in the browser's memory. So I do some stuff like that too.
Yeah. So that's sort of the really specific, tricky parts of working with HTMX. That's like, I kind of wanted to get into with a little bit because it's not something that I've talked about so much on here, because I think, a lot of the sort of the basic stuff is easy. Like it's just easy. You just like, you do the get, you do the post, and everybody kind of gets that pretty quickly. And I do think, having worked with it enough to come across some of those, I think what you listed, number one, the JavaScript third-party plugins, they have to initialize every time, it's like, or something. Maybe it's not even initialization. They have to refresh. Like that has been an issue. And I don't know if you mentioned this just now, but like, you do a partial page load and you push the URL to the top, you got to be able to refresh. Same sort of thing. It's like, you don't want to lose those nice, and HTMX does provide things to do that.
I spent like, of that 8 hours, like 2 hours of that was, we've got some pages that are really long, and if you go all the way to the bottom, but then you click something in the sidebar, I wanted it to go to the top of the page. And so I had to figure out, like, what's the HTMX way to scroll to the top of the page when the page hasn't refreshed? And so it was just those kind of like dumb little tricks that you have to kind of figure out when you're in there.
Yeah, I think, and that to me is a little bit of the key, is like, what's the HTMX way? And like, that's not always immediately obvious, I think, because it is relatively low level. And, you know, I've been trying to kind of figure out some of those myself, and some of them are in the docs. You know, you can like find it and say, oh, okay, this is like sort of what's recommended. But, you know, not everything, because it's like there's multiple ways to accomplish how, you know, it depends how you want to split your template up, depends how you want to like show your different parts of the page. And it's like, there are a lot of options, and it's not, I think that's one of the hardest parts for people, is there isn't a smooth, here's the one way to do it for a lot of stuff.
It's very unopinionated, and it makes the assumption that you're a good enough developer to like pick what you want to do.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, that can be tough. Like, even, you know, I had some relatively straightforward, in my mind, like tables, and I'm like, you know, the idea is like, you've got a table, you want to click to see more details. And like, that is a relatively straightforward kind of setup. And then within that, you want to click again and get more details. And that's actually like a really cool thing you can do with HTML. Like, anything that loads these partial things, like, you can have an unbelievable amount of data, and then it's just hidden until you want to reveal it. And it's, you know, all loadable and stuff like that. But what I found was that there were like a lot of different ways that I could structure even that sort of simple, straightforward thing. And so I sort of chose my favorite, you know, which was like a certain way of doing it. But I was surprised, like, even for like, I thought I would just, there'd be an immediate, like, this is how to do this in my head, and look it up or something like that.
Yeah. That's all of the extra time I spent after that first weekend in playing with HTMX is like all the things that I wanted to do that weren't that simple first use case. So it's like, I wanted to do like a live search, so that as you're typing in the little search bar at the top of the page, it's like pre-populating stuff that it finds in our system. And so that was great. But then I had to like add a whole bunch of exceptions to my main template code to say like, okay, normally I tell you to just fill stuff in this main content area, but this time ignore it and ignore all the other. So it's just all those little exceptions that I think the problem is I enjoy them. I think that's what makes it exciting. That's why I get fired up. I'm like, oh, I have this whole new way of building products now, where I don't have to conform to whatever. I can just build whatever is the best solution for what I'm trying to do. But I think that turns off some people who are like, I just need to know how to do the thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's like, because I sort of feel the same. And, you know, one of the things I really have appreciated about using it is when I go back to look at like, okay, how is this built? What did I do here? Like, I go into the code and I'm like, oh, there it is. Like, oh, here's the input for the text search, and there's a whole bunch of HX whatever is on it. So it's like, oh, I see what I was doing here. You know, it's like, I think that locality of behavior. And so I haven't ever really in my programming life got that into events, which like sounds a little silly because, you know, I've needed to, and I have done it, but I've never really felt comfortable or fully trusted events, I would say, because I just, you know, I've same sort of thing. I've been burned a few times. So how much do you get into events, and do you sort of think of it as, you keep it local, or do you have a separate like event bus where you handle kind of JavaScript events and stuff like that?
I have gone that hardcore in the past. So like it kind of goes back to like my initial, my earliest programming jobs were like at the very start of the Ajax kind of thing in the early 2000s. And so I did a lot of experimentation. So like I used to build my own framework for my team that I worked on at the time. And so I would do all kinds of stuff. Be like, I'm going to make it like a, you know, like a Windows app inside of my browser. And so it needs to have like menu events and all kinds of stuff. And JavaScript, to its credit or to its flaw, will let you do that kind of nonsense. And so now I try not to get into things. I try to do as little as possible all the time. But I know that I have that there if I need to, right? I understand event dispatching and how you can watch for things and how you can, I've had to use it in the past as a way to like pass messages between like two disparate components. It's really good at that. But almost always it feels like that ends up being the more complex solution to something that could have been simplified with, some architecture changes a little bit higher.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm kind of in the same boat. I guess I ask because I feel like there's, I talked to a couple of people that I've talked to in these sort of episodes and conversations. I think there's sort of two camps, and one of them is much more sort of event driven, and, maybe we'll have like the after settle. Like you could put in down at the bottom of your page, you could put some JavaScript like after settle, and this is where I'm going to handle all my plugins, and here's the plugins I'm going to initialize. And then other people sort of will maybe put that directly onto each attribute. Like on this attribute, we want to trigger this. So it's like I kind of, I haven't done a ton with the events. I've noticed how powerful the HX on is, and especially I've tapped into the HTMX specific events quite a bit. I found those to be really useful.
I think in general, so I even in my current product, I use both mechanisms, right? So like the after settle, I had to use, from day one to get our current JavaScript that already existed to work in our system. And then I'll have, one-offs that are using HX on, for the search bar I was talking about, where I wanted to like do something specific when you're typing. So it's like on type with a delay of 2 seconds, then it actually sends the event to the server.
Yeah, love that stuff.
And so I think they're both powerful tools, especially if you can use them where it's appropriate. I generally would lean more towards like, I would rather write a function, at least for JavaScript side, in JavaScript code itself. So I'm almost always going to prefer not being inside of an attribute. It's probably a bias from the early days of web development, where it's like we were trying intentionally as a culture to move away from putting inline styles and inline JavaScript, which was how we did things 2005 to 2008. And so I have a bias now where it's like I'd rather whenever possible put stuff into a JavaScript file that can be then cached after it's downloaded. If that fails, then I'd want to put it in a script tag that's like on the page, but where you can very clearly see like here's the JavaScript that's executing, and then the last place would be an attribute
inline. Yeah.
Which is now that you bring it up, it's wild because one of the things I like about HTMX is that like it adds more attribute stuff. I think what I like about it is that I think it's on the HTMX website or in the Hados book or whatever, where it's saying like it's just adding stuff to HTML that should have been there in the first place. Like we're just adding the ability to make server requests on things that just aren't links or forms.
Right. Yeah. No, it's true. And I think like, I have sort of a hierarchy of like, and I haven't put this down into writing or anything. I'm sort of just thinking of it now, but it's like, if it's like one line, I usually keep it in the attribute. If it's like HX on this, some event, if it's just going to be one line, once I start to like write JavaScript on multiple lines within a single attribute, it's just like visually, I don't like that. I'm like, where's the indentation? It's starting to get weird. I'm probably going to move that down to, the script tag. And then if I have so many script tags that it starts to get unwieldy, I'm like, all right, maybe this is a JavaScript file. So I think that's my natural sort of process.
What is the name of the precursor library to HTMX that he's always like joking about, where he runs both Twitter accounts? What's that first one? It's the one that has the weird
Intercooler JS.
Intercooler, yeah. Like that stuff. I've never used it on purpose, but it's crazy when I see it. I'm just like, wow, that's amazing. The fact that someone built this.
Interesting. Yeah, I know. I've never used that either. I just haven't. It's like
but
HTMX
cool.
was kind of the first. Yeah.
But there's so much of the intercooler stuff. So like the when you're doing like HX on, a lot of that has intercooler syntax in it. So you can like write. When I did that search thing, I'm putting in like, hey, do this, but only after 2 seconds has passed, and there's no additional key presses. That's like intercooler syntax.
Oh wait, sorry. Are you talking about like writing English?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's actually HyperScript.
HyperScript.
So I think Intercooler also so HyperScript is a separate project.
It came out of both, right?
Yeah. So I think Intercooler uses HyperScript also, but like you can use without using any Intercooler, you can use just the HyperScript.
Is crazy.
that
I'm
stuff
glad
is
it exists.
wild.
Yeah, but I'm just like, he's a wizard. They build them different out there in Montana or wherever.
So I don't. So like this is probably 2 weeks ago, but I was like, okay, I'm building a new thing right now. A new thing I'm working on. I get to choose my tech stack, whatever. So I'm gonna try the HyperScript rather than writing vanilla JS, because I've been writing kind of vanilla JS for a lot of stuff that's inline and stuff like that. So like I'm gonna do it, do the HyperScript, and I'll just say like I was like trying to figure out how to do something relatively simple, and let me think if I can remember what it is right now. I think it was disabling a button until some condition was met. It's like I have a form. I don't want them to submit the form until they type in
check a box or something.
Yeah, exactly. So to me, this is like relatively straight. This is very common, relatively straightforward. And I would say I was like I couldn't find an exact example using HyperScript, and then it's in this kind of English syntax, and I really wanted to do it using it, and my first 10 guesses didn't work, and I was like, man, I can't figure this. I cannot figure out what the right wording for this is to make this work. So I'm sure it can handle that sort of obvious situation, but like at some point maybe I'll work with somebody who has a good idea of how it all fits together. But I could not get like a pretty straightforward thing from my own guesses to work. So I had to pull it out for now, but we'll see.
That's still pretty impressive. Like I have only used it in like 2 places where I had like an existing example that I pulled from one of the websites, and it was like, on this, do this. And I was like, oh, cool. But it terrifies me.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I love the concept of it. Like, this kind of being able to, because I like being able to look at something and understand what it does. It's just in some code I know so well that it feels like that, but I know secretly it's not. It's actually like I only know this because I've been doing PHP for 20 years, like, so I know what this loop does or whatever. But like, I don't know, being able to actually read it and then write it in something so close to English is pretty tempting. So I'll probably go down that path at some point just to see what it's like.
Well, we'll have to chat when you do. That sounds fun.
Yeah. So let's see. So I think overall, I mean, it sounds like this was the rewrite and everything like that was a success. Were you the only person working on it, or do you have kind of a team that was also kind of invested in this and sort of on board? And what was that experience like?
So right now I have one other engineer on my team. We're still kind of like in our first year. We're pretty small, and she's a really great engineer. But she's used to me like disappearing for a weekend and coming back with like a giant new feature. And so this giant new feature was like, hey, now this is HTMX powered and everything runs faster. And to her credit, she's been working with me for like 7 years now, so she kind of knows my modus operandi here when I get into things. And I think like the way I structured, so some of the decisions I made in how to like solve, how we import libraries into the product that are third party. Like I made those decisions knowing that she was going to have to do that too, and so I documented everything super well. We had a couple of meetings about it. And I tried to make an API for things. So like I made a function that you pass a callback to that automatically fires without having to do anything crazy.
So actually is that how you solve that? Like, did you, do you like, you set up, sounds like a new event like on HTMX header, HX header or something. When that's fired, it runs. And then you like requested that they add whatever new plugin into that sort of initialization process?
Yeah, so how our product worked before I switched to HTMX is that every one of our like apps or pages was like a full standalone thing. It had its own controller and its own view. And those are just straight up normal PHP files. But how we were doing things is like, okay, well, this is the only page that needs, a markdown editor or something. So on that specific view in the template, right above where I start writing like HTML code and, echoing out stuff from the database, I would put in like a script tag and say, hey, load this script tag and initialize the editor. So we were already kind of doing that, where each one of our pages would be the only place that dependencies would be loaded or called, right? Like if the page didn't need a markdown editor, it wouldn't ever show up.
Right.
So when I switched to HTMX, like everything worked on individual page loads, but as soon as I went back and forth and stuff, it was breaking. And so I went in and I wrote a couple of functions The first one is register HTMX handler, where it just takes a callback and the name of the route that you're on. So the route is everything that's like window.location.pathname, everything after the end of the URL. And so that uses that as a key. So whenever you're on that page, if that callback is defined, it will execute. And so the beauty of that is I then don't have to worry about if I'm going forward or backward, or if I landed on the page for the first time and it's just a brand new page load, or I clicked there 15 times. It's always going to, whenever that page loads on either DOM content loaded or window.popstate or HTMX after settle, any of those like, hey, we finished loading this stuff now, it calls a function that says, okay, is there a function defined that has this path name as the key? And so the page is always going to try and define it, but if it's already been defined, it will just execute.
Is this a JavaScript function you're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So so even if it hits that code twice, it's just it's fine because it's just checking to see if the function is defined.
And it knows to call it because the page is loaded. So if I leave a page and then I come back to a page, I still have to reinitialize a markdown editor and things like that. Because like, you know, the HTML coming back from the server is just showing like, you know, this is text area class markdown editor. The JavaScript code from the library still has to call easy MDE new easy MDE with the class name or the element reference. And so I have to call that on every load regardless. And so writing that function made it easy for me, for her, and for, you know, any future engineers to not have to ever worry about like, okay, what are the events that I would have to watch or know about for a page load event? And so because HTMX adds so many different types of them, I just wrote a basically like a little API internal to us that like takes care of that all the time, so that nobody has to worry about it.
Yeah, I mean, this sounds like that's very cool. I mean, that sounds like something that potentially you are bringing to just any generic any project going forward. You know, you can sort of use this same. I don't know if it's a code snippet or if it's like its own sort of JavaScript functions. File.
Yeah. To be honest, like we started having this conversation, and I was just kind of like reflecting on what I had done to date, and I was like, I should just open source this. You know, it's.
I mean, that sounds very cool.
It's stuff I had to do to solve this problem for me. I'm sure other people probably have similar types of problems. It's like what we were talking about earlier, where there's just like not a plethora of recipes that are available, where it's like, this is the way to do it. I'm not saying my way is the way to do it, but it's a way to do it.
No, I mean, that sounds really interesting because I think, you know, the way that you're talking about building this stuff, I mean, there isn't, no matter what, someone who's working with third-party JavaScript stuff is going to have to do this. Like, there's just no, you know, because you're doing partial loads, it's sort of the whole, it just comes with it. And I think, you know, from my experience doing this, which, you know, I don't use as many third-party JavaScript plugins as I used to, but I mean, you need them sometimes for sure. Like stuff like calendars, charting.
Yeah. That's exactly it. It's charting, you know, drag and drop file uploads, all that kind of nonsense.
Yeah, and you know that's funny because I haven't done a drag and drop file upload in a while, but I think people probably would love that. Oh, I probably should be throwing those in.
I've just been using this for years. It's called DropZone.js, where you literally just have a class called it's a form. You make a form element with a class of DropZone, and when the page loads, it automatically attaches to it and replaces it with one of those like drop here to upload things. It's so cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, I mean, have you ever done any open source? I'll just say, like, I have never contributed to an open source project. I've never created my own. I put some stuff on GitHub and then just never did anything with it because I wasn't. So I haven't done that. Is this something, a world you've sort of been involved in at all?
I have been very heavily open source influenced for the past 20-something years. Like the early stage of my career, I was working in a government facility, so we were like on our own separate network. And so my hobby at the end of the day of working on things that nobody ever got to see was I would go and I made a pirate-themed JavaScript library where everything was like named after ships. And, you know, this was like 2004.
Yeah. At the height of Speak Like a Pirate Day, if I remember correctly.
I was totally into that back then.
Yeah.
I've contributed significantly to libraries that I was using, like EXT.js, you know, or Rico.js. We would find a bug. I'd be like, hey, when I use this select dropdown, you say it does this, but it doesn't because of, you know, IE6 sucks. And so I would contribute and submit patches.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a world I never got into. I'm such a user of things I'll try stuff out. I've never source dived on HTMX, and I've never tried to, I haven't.
It's so fun.
I think I am considering it. I'm not considering. I'm definitely going to do it. Yeah. I'm trying to figure out how. One of the nice things, Carson, I've seen on the website is that he has himself walking through the source code of HTMX video. And that feels like such. You have watched that? Oh, nice. Yeah. Okay, I have not watched that yet, but that's such a good idea. Like, it's such like here's an introduction from the person who wrote it. Just like, I don't know why I don't see that more in like the open source world. Like, now that I think about it, like what a straightforward good idea.
I think most people don't like to be on camera.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, you don't have to show your face, you can just like talk over it. But if you're the creator, I think that's such a cool thing.
There's some scariness to things. I can definitely remember having hesitation 15 years ago of like, oh, I'm building this library, but it was okay for me to publish it because I was just going by my pseudonym. It was just a blister release, and it was just on SourceForge, and nobody had to know who I was. If it sucked, oh well.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you about something who's never published anything. It's super easy. Don't even worry about it. Yeah.
Well, I published a book. That was fun.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Like for a tech
book?
Or...
So like 5 startups ago, we had a robotics company. We sold a robotics kit that was programmable. And so a part of that was we had a curriculum that taught you how to program the robots using Arduino C. And so I wrote a textbook to go along with it.
That's awesome. What was it like writing a book, actually? I'm just curious about that. Because
it's awesome. It's exactly as good as being a software engineer. For me anyway, it's the exact same itch where like I don't have to talk to anybody. I have information in my head and I'm just going to type by myself. And at the end of it, I will have something done. And so,
like a real product. Yeah. That's actually like more tempting to me than trying to do open source stuff, because then you maintain it forever. My sense in writing a book is that it's a ton of work, and you maybe do revisions or something like that, but you're creating something that will last forever. And that's just, that's just cool.
You write a tech book and then, Angular 2 comes out, your Angular 1 book is useless.
Yeah. Well, you got to, what'd you write it? It was about like C and Arduino, right? Like that's Arduino, not changing anytime soon.
Well,
that's
our company went out of business, so nobody needs to buy that book.
Gotcha. Yeah, I guess there's a platform risk there. Mm-hmm. So I think just like in some of the details of kind of implementing, let's say there's someone out there who is like considering like, okay, I've got a pretty straightforward CRUD style, maybe that's not exactly descriptive of your sort of app.
No, I think that's descriptive of almost everybody's app. Almost everybody else is lying.
I don't like to like make people feel bad if they're not open to that idea, but like everybody's app is basically a pretty simple CRUD app, and we are all
just building database interfaces for people.
Yeah. So someone who's trying to do that, like it sounds like, the third-party plugins is one, but like what dragons are there that like they should maybe, just to like have in the back of their mind? Like you've been developing for 20 years, so you probably had a pretty good idea. First of all, did you start by just creating a new Git branch or something? Or like,
no,
do you just dive in and just
did
I got the production code right here.
Right.
Yeah. I
log into on the production server. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm kind of in the same boat here. So I usually do the Git thing, but that's about it.
So at the time, like a year ago, January or whatever, like, we had just launched. We had like 4 users, and it was mostly me, so I wasn't worried about it. But now I take I have a demo server and staging and stuff.
Whoa!
Yeah, it's crazy. What are some things to watch out for? So I think one of the things that I am most attracted to about HTMX and that I have had the most success with is the same thing that I think makes it super powerful, which is I am building a web app as if JavaScript doesn't even exist. So I'm building. My backend code, it's just a CRUD app. You go to a page, it's at this URL, I display some stuff, and maybe if it's a form on it, you post it back to server and I save it somewhere. So that's the philosophy in everything that I build. And then HTMX gets to come in here, and it reminds me of like the early 2006 era concept of progressive enhancement, where it's like, if JavaScript is turned off, if you don't have it at all in your browser, everything on my page will still work. It will just be less smooth. It will be less flashy. And so I build my apps that way, and that's why I think the transition was so easy for me, which is um, I'm always trying to operate it as if like my user is on a bad browser, or they're on a mobile phone, or they're behind a network and something is blocked, or someone else on the team wrote something that has an error that we didn't catch properly. I just never trust JavaScript as anything other than like nice, right?
Right.
And so when I'm building an app, I'm already building it. I'm trying to break things up so that like I like file-based routing is a good example where it's like I don't want to have an API for my framework. I just want to have like you went to this page and htaccess behind the scenes in Apache is just saying like, okay, whenever someone asks for this, like actually call index.php but pass that in as a query parameter. And so if someone's building a tool where they're going to I know that it's going to go to this file is going to execute and then output this HTML. It's really easy for you to make wild and sweeping technology changes, whether it's HTMX or you can I have at times using this exact same type of structure been like, oh, I need a document viewer, to be able to like display and render PDFs and Microsoft Word documents and stuff inside the browser. Well, there's a really good library that does that in React, so I'm going to make that one page by itself be a React page.
Yeah, interesting.
And so that kind of separation where you're like not tied to any tech stack on the front end. The front end is literally just me sending data to the user, and how the user wants to render it is like, I'm going to give suggestions with CSS and JavaScript.
Right.
But I'm never building my product as if the front end has to be there.
Interesting. Yep.
Like you could use my tool today, just using like Postman and making get and post requests like directly in the browser because it's still going to work. I kind of build the product like an API in the first place. I really like bought into the idea of REST and RESTful design being like a super important part of your structural identity as a product. And so I've been doing that for almost 20 years now, where it's like, okay, if I think of things like I'm going to have the view be the first parameter after the server name, the ID is going to be the second parameter, and like an action maybe is the third. That gives me a framework where like I don't have to do anything but like write 4 lines of code, and now every page in my platform will follow that same kind of structure. And so if I'm on CRM 7, that means like look in the database for record 7 and display it.
Yep. So what was the like? Do you're not using a particular framework? You're using language. Like, you don't use Laravel when you use PHP, or what's that sort of decision process?
Not in this project. So I have been for the past like 3 companies that I've started that have been in PHP. I'm using a framework that I built myself like 15 years ago called PHP Pain Free. I built that framework literally to just meme on my. I worked with a coworker who was like very into the CodeIgniter community at the time, and so CodeIgniter was like a precursor to Laravel, where you had to. My complaint was is not that they weren't great, because they're all freaking amazing at what they do. Like Ruby on Rails is awesome, right? Laravel is amazing, but I'm not a programmer. I'm a framework developer, right? I'm doing what I have to know what their API wants me to do, and I always felt like my responsibility was to be a really good software engineer, regardless of framework. So I can go work in Laravel, I can go work in SharePoint because I know the language. Whether that's C# or PHP. And if the language changed, like I'm never going to be the greatest Laravel programmer because I don't do it all day. And so then I would pick Laravel in a situation where I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to build a product that is ideally suited for Laravel to solve. And I just don't have those kind of problems, but I'm biased as well. So
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think like I will say I dabbled before I started using Laravel. I was the lead programmer, or for a little while the only programmer at a company, and I ended up building my own essentially a framework myself. Mm-hmm. But the problem with my framework was that I was the requirement from above me in the company was we want to move to an SPA. And I was like, okay, I don't like Angular. I don't like Ember. These were the things at the time that were big. And so the framework that I ended up building was basically an SPA, like a JavaScript, like a way for PHP to send stuff to JavaScript so that it worked like an SPA. and it just was so, I lost the back button. I lost all these things that I really liked. And so, I think that experience, though, of building a framework is just, it was so valuable to me.
Yeah.
And even though I really don't like what I ended up with, and I hated working with it later, for me, this was because I moved away from that's not what I actually should have done. I don't think, like it wasn't the right call in that moment. But how much you sort of learn about things when you try to do that, that's hard to kind of like duplicate.
And I tell that to everybody, it kind of comes across as like curmudgeonly a little bit, but it's like, be good at what you do, be good at your language, but then build solutions that are unique to you. Like, so I have this framework that I've been using for 10 years now, and it's a framework in the sense that it makes a database connection and it like does some routing. So it's file-based routing. If you go to this path, it reads this file. It's like 200 lines of code, but I've built 4 companies with it now, and it has been awesome every single time. And like one of the companies was really, really successful until COVID happened. And so I've got little PHP pain-free engineers floating around the United States.
That's cool.
But it's like, if I was working at a different company, I don't want to use React. I want to use what like the CTO of that company built. Like, let me do your specific solution for your specific like business use case. I don't like that's the fun part, I think. That's where you learn the most.
Right. No, and it is interesting. I mean, there really are. There's a lot of different types of businesses out there where they would just reach for a totally different type of solution. Although I will say, like, the basic generic solutions for some of this stuff work really well, as you're sort of describing. It's like, if you can handle routing and authentication and some of those basics, like, that's going to last you that's going to take you a long ways for most apps, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, that's like 90% of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, there's nothing wrong with them. Just, I think that everyone should feel comfortable trying different things. Like, I think that's where you grow as a person. It's where you grow as an engineer. You should be willing to like, okay, well, what if I build a library that is specific to our business?
Yeah. No, I mean, and there's such a benefit of, it's almost like when you're, as a developer, are willing to just really take control of your environment and it's like, I do this sometimes with projects where I'm like, I know I'm focusing on the wrong thing right now. Like I'm like, I'll just say I spent like, even just a couple weeks ago, I'm working on some mobile stuff, and I wanted the top of the app to have a background image. Right. And it's like, I'm like, this is pretty straightforward. And I wanted to be able to load it dynamically, whatever. It was just this little thing. And I was like, I had difficulty. And I was like, I could just skip this for now and come back to it. It's not the most important part of the app. It's the least important part of the app. But what is important is feeling like you understand the system and have like just a level of control over your code where like you can do stuff like that and you know how it works. And so it's like sticking with that and just kind of powering through the difficult parts and not skipping over them, so that you yourself have this confidence of like, I now control this code. It doesn't control me. There's something really powerful to that, I think.
Yeah. And that's what I love about more traditional languages like PHP or Python. It's like, it's very linear, right? Like, you start at line 1 and you read your way through. You might have to go to a different file. You might have a function call over here, but you can reason your way through how you got from point A to point B. I don't like it when a lot of magic happens where you call an API and it spins up a microservice somewhere else and, calls a Lambda function that returns some data blob.
Yeah.
That stuff drives me crazy.
No, this is the antithesis of control. You are now at their mercy for what they included in their API. And I really dislike some of that stuff. And then you hope
they don't upgrade or they don't change the API. And, now we're on use hooks instead of use effect or all the React things.
Yeah. So what do you think is next for, like, are you sort of, you're working on this project. Is it sort of done in the HTML in the sense that, like, the product, maybe you'll add features and stuff like that. But is it kind of like the HTMX part you feel like is solved, particularly with your sort of snippet on including third-party packages and stuff like that?
No, because we have like a very ambitious goal with this project.
Nice.
We named it Co-founder OS because we really do want to be like a web-based operating system. And so part of that is we hope to become a platform. I built this API layer so that any type of developer with the right credentials could install applications into our product that would then run on any other user of the product. So there's kind of like this multi-year mission where like, okay, I want every startup to use us. And if they want a different CRM, they install that CRM. And so I have to be able to like
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's why building your own framework is important, because I have to be able to like not only say, okay, this is the way you do it inside of our product, but I have to build an API for other developers to consume that will play nicely with all of this stuff. And so it's an architectural challenge. It's like structure of the project, structure of, how files are laid out. And
Yeah. Interesting.
it's
So,
fun.
that's probably less so on the front end stuff. That's going to be more on the back end
Yeah.
architecture and stuff like that. So the
Yes, to
HTMX
some
side of it is,
yeah, to some extent. But like, why someone would want to use our platform to build, their own application would be that, we've got this captive audience of brand new startups. And so if they wanted to, as an example, like sell health insurance to brand new startups, so they want to sell the health insurance directly in the product, they're going to have to be able to interact with the front end and display to the users, whatever types of selections that they want to make available. And so I have to not only build it so that it works on our side, I have to build it so that it renders, third-party content, and so that third-party developers would be able to, make use of clever stuff as well. Like it won't just be static content that we're displaying to users. It will be kind of like if you remember back to like the early days of Facebook when Zynga was like they were building inside of Facebook as their platform. You would have like they would be publishing to people's feeds, but then also you would click on something and you would bring up a full screen Farmville inside of Facebook.
right.
That's kind of the vision, I think.
Interesting. So you have to build an interface with parts unknown
Yep.
from systems that are, yeah.
Yeah. So right now I'm
Could
just
be from
trying to
all
build a
over.
good API, and then I'm also trying to build like data controls around like how do we protect our users' data while still making it possible for it to be exposed to third parties that I don't know about yet.
Yeah. Nice. I mean, I would just throw in a little minor thing that I think this sort of server-centric approach there, where you're not having a ton of stuff on the client side, not having a lot of, that's probably going to help with some of that
Yeah, I hope.
not exposing information kind of thing. That's at least my sense of how that stuff works. So, maybe just last few things here, but is there anything you could think of, or that like while you're building stuff like that you feel like is missing from the sort of HTMX hypermedia ecosystem, where you like wish that it sounds like it was a pretty smooth process, and like you appreciate the low levelness of it almost to the point where maybe it's unnecessary to sort of do more stuff with it.
I think just from this conversation today, and from having spent hours and hours with my other engineer on my team, I think there is an opportunity for a large corpus of like language specific recipes, tutorials, things like that. The documentation to me is great. I'm like, okay, there's an attribute, server returns stuff back. But if I was going to go and as a new user, let's say I was a junior engineer, a mid-level engineer, and I got a ticket for something, let's go add dynamic searching to this thing using HTMX. I would go there. You have to be able to like combine 4 or 5 different examples, like, dynamically filling stuff in, and like delay for hypermedia or whatever it's called. And there's a whole bunch of stuff where, okay, now we're doing this in PHP, but what if you're a Go shop or you're a Python Django shop? Like, even just seeing examples of like, here's how you would do this. So I think Stripe is probably like one of the better players in this space, where they're like, we know you just want to be able to like charge your customers for things. Here is examples how to do 7,000 different things in 15 different languages. I think that would be great.
Interesting. Yeah. And one of the things that Stripe always kind of provided, like, I think you're right, they had a little like switcher, which language you're doing up every single example, and they're mostly copy paste examples. Like, you can, for the most part, just copy and click the copy button, and then you can switch and choose your language. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think
like
little
that.
things like that would be helpful to at least increase adoption, where I don't think a lot of people have as much breadth of experience as we do. You know, we've been doing this 20 plus years. I look at HTMX, I'm like, oh, that reminds me of stuff I was doing in 2008, and it looks awesome. And so I'm like, yes, and then. But new people, maybe they graduated from a boot camp, or maybe they're a recent college grad, or, you know, they've only worked at one or two companies. They come in and they're like, why would you do this? And I'm like, because it's awesome, and it's going to save you so much time and stress and energy. But like, I don't know how to show that to you without you knowing that it's available.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. There really is like kind of a background of Web 1.0 that I wonder. I almost want makes me wonder if sort of like if you're from the React world, what does an HTMX snippet of code look like to you? Because I can't, you know, I know what it looks like to me coming from Web 1.0. I'm like, oh yeah, Ajax, like we got a request, we'll fill in partial. Like it's just like, it's so straightforward in a way. And I don't know what the mental model is if you have started in the virtual DOM, JavaScript, React world.
The first time I saw JSX, I was like, that has got to be invalid code somehow. There's like fake elements inside of HTML with no string quotes or anything around it. I was like, that's gross.
Yeah, well, I had that experience. Have you ever used Tailwind UI?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, so I had, you know, I use Tailwind for pretty much everything now, and I love it. I got the Tailwind UI, and I was like, you know what, I've paid for Tailwind UI now. I'm gonna use it as my like dashboard, you know, not my dashboard, but my my landing page. And so I go into the code for Tailwind UI, how they recommend this. And first of all, it's like, you know, you download, and it's like, it was like maybe 45 files, I would have to guess. And I looked at like inspect element to see, I was like, okay, I got the example booted up. You inspect element, and like you're going maybe 30, 40 divs deep before you're getting to like basic stuff. And I was like, holy moly, this is all Next.js. And so I felt very removed from that. I was like, this is appealing. This is like making sense to somebody. Obviously, Tailwind UI is huge. It's probably most of the industry sort of is familiar with this kind of code, but very obfuscated from what was happening. It was my impression.
Tailwind is a really good example. So like I've historically been more of a Bootstrap guy, and I've played with Tailwind a bunch of times, and I like, you know, I like a lot of the designs and stuff that are capable with that. But it feels very much like that too is a return to like 2000s era. Like we're just gonna inline style things, and it's like W100 and with, you know, background blue. I'm like, we did that before. I don't get it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've liked it. I'll just give my quick pitch for Tailwind.
Ahead, please.
You like before when you would inline stuff, you know, you're using CSS. Some of the things that Tailwind encapsulates are several lines of CSS. So like even like a shadow, you know, you just do like shadow in Tailwind, and what's actually happening behind the scenes is like box shadow 00, Mozilla box shadow 00, like it's like up to, you know, 4 or 5, and there's a ton of attributes or classes that are like this. And so I think that the things that I really appreciate about it, the thing I don't appreciate about it is that it recommends a build step, which I just don't use anymore. So, but they have an option around that, so that's fine. But what I really appreciated is that you don't have to know some of the details of CSS to use the things. It helps to know some of it, and then also just like you don't have to reload any CSS files. Like there's just one CSS file. So as you change your classes, it's very immediate, you know, what happens there. You're not like Command R, like, oh, I got to pull in the CSS again, you know, that sort of thing, break the cache or something like that. So I found it very nice for using attributes. I do think that your page starts to get, if you're really doing a lot of design, it does start to get a little heavy.
Like the things that I like about Tailwind are the same things I like about Bootstrap, which is like it's a very well structured, well designed, super thought out CSS like approach to CSS. And then what I like about Bootstrap is they go like maybe one level higher, where they're like, we're going to design a few elements that you're going to reuse everywhere, like a card or a card body, card. So like, and so Tailwind what I think it exceeds Bootstrap in a lot of ways for is I think that there are a lot of people right now that are very talented designers that are doing all of their best work in Tailwind, and I see stuff and I'm like, oh, I want to do that, and I have to do it in Tailwind, or like, manually myself convert it to something else.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I'll tell you, like, two of the things I'm working on are
Cool.
that are, one of them is I mentioned a couple episodes ago, the HTMXlabs.com, which I'm actually going to change the name of soon. But HTMXlabs.com is going to be a page of examples.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, so
Perfect.
it's like I've been trying to get feedback from people on what.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
awesome.
So one of the things I'm thinking is, like, I'm wondering if, like I said, I've never been an open source, but I'm thinking of ways that people could, contribute or just make suggestions, and even like what, pulling from a repo. I just never really got comfortable with that. So I'm like, what do you think about if people could just submit a code sample? Like, if I had like a place where they could type it in,
I think that'd be fun.
Submit it with a thing.
It kind of, what I hope you're describing, kind of based on our conversation, is that it kind of reminds me of like CSS Zen Garden from the early days of the web, where it's like one page, and here's everyone uploads their own CSS file to show off what can be done. And so if this is just like a whole bunch of different recipes and cool things to do in HTMX, you might be on exercise, example 7, and it's some cool like accordion widget, and then you put in the first one, but I can come in here and be like, hey, that's really cool, here's another version.
That's interesting.
So it can kind of be its own thing, I think.
I loved CSS Zen Garden, and I think I even have an episode where I talk about how it sort of sold us a lie, but I loved it, and because I think
the lie?
To me, the lie with CSS Zen Garden is that there is a full separation between design and data. And okay. That has not, it worked so beautifully on CSS Zen Garden that I really bought into it, and I really tried. And what I've found since is that to make realistic changes to your design, you have to change the HTML too. Yeah. Like, it's just, just do. Like, they're not, you can't just swap out the CSS and change your site. You can in some cases, but it's so... And what I saw in CSS, now that I like looked back at Zen Garden, it's like, man, they were doing some wacky stuff with CSS to get some of the effect. They could have just moved some divs around, So,
yeah. Well, I mean, that's even like Bootstrap and Tailwind, when they've got grids and stuff, they can be like, well, you can put this one over here first, even though it's third in the list. I'm like, that's stupid. Who's going to do that?
Yeah.
I mean, structure it correctly.
Right. No, I think of CSS Zen Garden as like, it was one of my favorite sites, but it also, I do think of it as like a case for some of the locality of behavior, and one of the reasons I like kind of having stuff there, because like inline and keeping the data and the design together, because they just kind of go hand in hand sometimes for me. So
the other thing that comes to mind for HTMX Labs specifically is maybe it's more like Genius.com, where it's like a song lyric, and then people are contributing like little notes and comments, like this section over here could be like this. That's maybe another like more modern.
So is that like people sort of take their interpretations of lyrics and kind of, I've never seen that site, but
that's all user contributed to for the most part. So like when an album of a new band came out, anyone can go in there and contribute transcriptions, upload album art and stuff.
Interesting.
So that to me is just as much open source as a repository, like those kinds of projects where you're collaborating. Like Stack Overflow is open source too. That's like people collaborating to make the world better and to improve, Wikipedia. Right?
To improve the large language models that, they gotta do their work to make sure that
which then feeds into my product, so that my product tells my users what to do a little bit better.
Yeah.
So
okay. No, that's interesting.
You mentioned there's 2 projects you're working on.
Yeah. Well, so actually, I've got a lot of dumb projects going in the back of my mind, but the other one I have been thinking is like this kind of idea of like a UI kit, but for hypermedia stuff. That's something I would say like inspired. But if you ever use Pico CSS, So Pico CSS, I tried to use it, but then like you come across like some things you want to customize or that you want to be different, and it's difficult. It doesn't cover every case. I think it's such a cool idea though, where like I actually did nothing to this page and it made it look much better, you know? Like, I think that starting that as like a base, but then kind of expanding that, because there's a lot of these UI kits, and I can't think of them right now, but, you know, there was one just released for Livewire, like Flux, and there's like the Radix or whatever. There's all these kind of Shad CN, like, but so many of them require you to have already bought into like a Next or React,
to be on
Livewire. You got to be on like, it's just like they have all these preconditions, and I looked for something that was like, I don't want those. And Bootstrap used to be my go-to. And, you know, now I'm like, Tailwind is good, but it's that same thing where it is very low level. And so what I really want is like, I want some defaults taken care of, and then I want to be able to add some stuff. So I've just been sort of thinking about that and sort of trying to see if there's a, you know, in my experience, I've needed that. So that's the sort of tool, you know, that I'm kind of looking at as well. So
that sounds awesome. Also, I am
nice.
I am a lifelong front-end avoider, so I love templates and things that are built for me that look good. So
nice. Yeah. No, me too. I mean, that's the, you know, that's the dream. So cool. Yeah. And then I'll throw in one more, you know, have you ever had to build mobile stuff before?
So, I've never built mobile native except for some games. I ran a game studio for a couple of years.
Oh, nice.
Not like, never Swift, never whatever was before Swift.
So what did you use, like Unity or something?
Yeah, Unity mostly. So we were a government contractor. We built games and simulations like for training purposes.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes we didn't even get to pick our tech stack. The government would just say, we would like this thing, and, you know, here's the amount of money. And then,
nice.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. But yeah, I mean, so I guess like I've had the need to, or maybe not need, but I've had the desire to be able to turn some of my web apps, not just give them like a online way to click through, but give them actually like a real app. So I did that with Flutter, and, you know, my experience with that was that like I hate Flutter. And I hated the way they organized their widgets, and the code was a mess. And I hated that every time I had to make a change, I had to like submit it to Apple and Android. Like, that's a nightmare, right?
Yeah,
like,
that's why I don't do those.
Yeah. So here's my concept. Which I guess my question is like, you know, how appealing does this sound? But if you had like, and this is, so I think that there's a project called Hyperview that is already sort of doing this, which I'm hoping to learn more about in the future. But if you had something that you built on the back end, like you just sent it data, and the app itself is a shell, empty shell, does nothing until you pass it, essentially HTML, JSON, whatever, and then it populates, but using all the native elements in it. You know, the app itself functions and moves like a regular mobile, mobile app.
So you're going to build like a native app itself that is kind of a shell, like Electron is for desktop, where it's like, okay, it exists now, and here's the code to display inside, but then it translates to native.
Yeah, exactly. So instead of showing you, because I think I don't know that much about Electron, but doesn't it kind of do a browser inside?
It's just Chrome, and then.
So this is what I don't want to do. Like, I don't want to think of it as a website. I want to build a bunch of native components that are driven by sending backend code, if that makes sense. So let's even just imagine it as HTML. You know, like you have like your outer HTML, but that translates to like your screen, and then you're doing like data within the screen. So that, like, you know, when I need to make a change on the app, I'm actually just changing backend code that I send, and there's never any updates to the app. You know, I'm not changing anything. It's like every screen is dynamically built from you know, some backend thing. So anyway, that's kind of the concept.
That sounds pretty interesting too. I mean, historically, I always build a really good web product first, get traction, and then I'm like, I will eventually hire mobile engineers, and they'll come in and switch it over. But that sounds cool.
Yeah, and my problem with the mobile stuff, like, is I've looked into hiring people to do it, and it's like the way that it works, like, man, every time I want to make a change, I'm freaking screwed. I've got to wait 2 weeks. Like, that feedback time is just not good. It's terrible for some of that stuff. So
I've been like on X, you know, every couple of weeks Elon will come out and be like, would you guys buy an X phone? And I'm like, yes, we need more competition in the space because Apple and Google have kind of a stranglehold on Play Store and stuff.
Yep. Nice. So yeah, I mean, anything. I know this was me pitching you on stuff, but like I think like I'm just curious. Like you're someone who's dove deep into some of these HTMX details, and hypermedia and stuff like that. So I really appreciate the feedback and talking to me about some of your experience, and I think people will really appreciate some of the tips and tricks and the kind of actual things. If you end up open sourcing what you're doing in some way.
I'll open source it this weekend. I got a couple. I've given a similar type of presentation of like, here's what I did. Here's some tips and tricks. I'll send that to you as well if you want to share that.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. That'd be awesome.
What else? And definitely keep me in the loop with all your projects. HTMX Labs sounds awesome. So whatever that ends up being, I'd like to help somehow.
Nice. Yeah. No, I think I think that what you sort of said about like even if I put up an example. Because, so I was sort of thinking having a submission process and then I could approve and stuff like that. But I think the way you sort of framed it as like, even if there's already examples there, showing alternatives, giving maybe whether it's in a different language or maybe it's just a different way of approaching it or something like that.
Or it could be as simple as letting me publish an article. Like, hey, here's a cool thing I did with my specific technology.
That's related to this example or something.
And so that it just becomes an HTMX like hub of documentation and learning.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like the sound of that. Cool. Awesome. Well, so I'm going to be building that in public over the next couple.
Perfect.
That's my next season of this podcast. This season was all conversations, so that's my plan is to build that in public. So
as soon as you're ready for beta testers or whatever, hit me up.
Awesome. All right. Sounds good. Well,
it was great talking to you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time and going into it. And yeah, anything else you'd like to plug or kind of like mention on the way?
For anybody who is interested in starting a new startup, it doesn't have to be tech, doesn't have to be, we help everybody of every kind. We have a really nice AI-powered tool. We have people we've got like combined 80 years of startup experience on our team. We've raised $15 million, over a bunch of times. We just like helping people be more successful in startups. So if you're interested, MakeStartups.org.
And this is like any startup in any industry.
Ideally, I think the best version of our tool is the 3-month in-person boot camp that is like in Georgia, because that's like more hands-on. But we have like a self-paced online version. Yeah, anyone, anywhere, any type of business.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you very much for sharing. And have a good one.
You too.
Bye.